After a peaceful week visiting her sister in Vermont, 62-year-old Lila Bennett returned to find her life unrecognizably altered. The taxi hadn't even rolled to a full stop when she spotted her 4 suitcases neatly aligned on the sidewalk. A note was wedged under the handle of the largest one, flapping in the light spring breeze. Lila paid the driver in a daze, her stomach curling as she reached for the note. The handwriting was Camille's, sharp, rushed, and unmistakably cold. "If you want to stay, the garage is available. Your loving daughter-in-law." Lila stood still, the words sinking into her like ice water. For a long moment she couldn't move. She just stood there on the curb, her eyes locked on the house she had called home for over 30 years. Her home. The one she and her late husband Frank had built from the ground up when their son Nathan was just a toddler. It still had the white shutters she'd painted herself, the tulip bed Frank had planted for their 25th anniversary. And now, according to Camille's note, it no longer belonged to her. Not in any meaningful way. She gripped the paper tighter, her hand trembling. A gray cloud swirled above, as if nature itself had decided to echo her mood. With shaking fingers, she pulled out her phone and dialed her bank. The customer service representative picked up after 2 rings. "Yes, Ms. Bennett. I see the mortgage payment of $1,900 processed last Friday. Just like every month," the voice confirmed. Lila closed her eyes. She wasn't going crazy. She had in fact still been paying for the house. Despite transferring the deed to Nathan and Camille after Frank passed, she had continued paying the bills out of love and perhaps guilt. They had just had their daughter Mia, and finances had been tight. Lila thought she was helping. What a fool she had been. A soft raindrop kissed her forehead, then another. She didn't flinch. She simply gathered her suitcases slowly, one by one, and rolled them toward the garage. She didn't need to check it was unlocked. Inside, a twin mattress had been shoved into a corner, a cheap nightstand placed next to it. A folding rack held her clothes, and cardboard boxes, labeled Lila's stuff, lined the wall. She sat on the mattress staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed. "Mom, we need the space. Camille needs a home office. The garage has everything you need." "Don't make this difficult, Nathan." Lila stared at the message, jaw tight. "Don't make this difficult." As if she were the unreasonable one. As if pushing her into a storage space like a forgotten relic was a rational, loving decision. Her thumb hovered over the reply button, but she didn't type anything. Instead, she called Norma. Norma had been her best friend since high school, loud, brash, fiercely loyal. She picked up instantly. "Lila, you back already?" Lila's voice caught. "Norma, they put me in the garage." There was a pause. "Then I'll be there in 15. Don't unpack a damn thing." True to her word, Norma arrived in exactly 14 minutes, engines still running, as she marched into the garage, like a soldier entering enemy territory. She didn't say anything. She just helped Lila toss her suitcases into the back of her Subaru and drove off, windows fogging as the rain poured heavier. Back at Norma's, Lila sat in the spare bedroom with a cup of lukewarm tea, staring at the floral wallpaper that hadn't changed in 2 decades. The silence was thick but comforting. "I feel like I'm floating," Lila murmured. "Like I've been untethered from everything." Norma sat beside her, folding one leg under the other. "Honey, you've been treading water in that house since Frank died. You just didn't notice the tide pulling you out. I thought I was helping. I thought signing the deed over would ease their burden. And I kept paying the mortgage because I didn't want them to struggle." Norma didn't respond right away. She reached over and took Lila's hand. "You did it out of love, but love isn't supposed to make you invisible." That word stung. Invisible. Lila's throat tightened. "I let it happen. I watched as Camille rearranged everything, threw away Frank's old fishing gear, pushed my keepsakes into storage. I gave up my space, my voice, and then I was gone." "Not gone," Norma said fiercely, "pushed out. But you're not helpless, Lila. You're angry, and you've got every right to be." Lila blinked down at her lap. Her hands were clenched into fists, white-knuckled. "I paid for that house. I built that life, and now I'm boxed up in their garage like I'm some kind of liability." Norma's eyes sparkled with something between pride and fury. "Then what are you going to do?" Lila looked out the window, the rain finally letting up. She could see the first traces of sunlight fighting to peek through. "I'm going to stop disappearing. I'm going to stop making it easy for them to forget I exist." For the first time in days, maybe months, Lila smiled. It wasn't a full, joyful smile, but it was something stronger, a promise to herself. And that night, as she lay under a quilt in Norma's guest room, surrounded by mismatched furniture and old photo frames, she didn't feel broken. She felt bruised, yes, betrayed, but not broken. She wasn't just Nathan's mother or Frank's widow. She was Lila Bennett, and she was done being sidelined. Lila sat alone on Norma's back porch the next morning, wrapped in a crocheted shawl, a half-empty mug of black coffee growing cold in her hands. The birds chirped somewhere in the trees behind the fence, but their song didn't reach her. Her gaze was fixed on the distance, not looking at anything in particular, just lost in thought. She wasn't crying. Not today. There were no tears left. Instead, the ache was quieter now, heavier. It settled in her chest like a stone. She turned the ceramic mug slowly in her hands, her fingers catching the chipped edge she'd always noticed, but never said anything about. Norma's house hadn't changed in decades. That was part of its charm. The same kitchen tiles, the same wood paneling, the same smell of cinnamon and lemon cleaner. It reminded her of a time when things made sense, when love wasn't a weapon. She leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes. It hadn't started with the garage. No, that was just the last straw. It started the day Camille moved in. At first, Lila had welcomed her with open arms. Camille was confident, polished, efficient. The type of woman who always had a schedule and a spreadsheet. Lila admired her drive, even envied it. But over time, that control seeped into places it didn't belong. It started with the kitchen. "This spice rack is outdated," Camille had said 3 months after the wedding. "We should modernize it. And maybe repaint the cabinets. That beige feels a little tired." Lila had smiled politely and said nothing, though she loved that spice rack. Frank had built it for her out of reclaimed wood one Christmas, carved little notches into it by hand. But she let it go. It was just a spice rack. Next came the living room. Camille moved Lila's books off the built-in shelves and replaced them with curated pottery and framed stock photos. Then, it was the family pictures. Photos of Lila and Frank started disappearing from the hallway gallery, swapped out for glossy prints of Nathan and Camille at wine tastings and charity events. Lila's wedding photo, her favorite, where she and Frank were laughing mid-dance, was quietly tucked into a drawer for safekeeping. Lila remembered the first time she confronted Nathan about it. "They're just making the house feel like theirs," he'd said gently, like a parent soothing a child. "Don't take it personally, Mom." She had nodded, though something inside her had cracked. Frank had only been gone 6 months then. His side of the closet still smelled like his aftershave. The grief was so fresh, it clung to her skin, and yet she'd smiled and nodded and tried to be gracious, thinking if she just gave a little, she could keep the peace. But each small concession turned into a larger one. And soon, she was giving up more than shelf space. She was giving up her voice. Camille decided the backyard needed to be revitalized, so Frank's vegetable garden was replaced with a stone patio and outdoor fire pit. "We can always go to the farmer's market," she'd said breezily when Lila protested. Nathan just shrugged. "It's more usable space now." When Lila brought it up to her friends at Bridge Club, they'd clucked their tongues and offered sympathetic nods, but no real advice. "You're lucky they want you there," someone had said once. "My son barely calls." So Lila began to question herself. Maybe she was the problem. Maybe it was time to let go, to step aside. The moment she truly realized she was no longer welcome in her own home, came one December afternoon. She'd gone to retrieve the Christmas decorations from the attic. Frank's old boxes full of mismatched ornaments, handmade crafts, and a star they'd bought during their first Christmas together in 1985. But when she opened the storage bins, all she found were new decorations, silver white sterile. She asked Camille about it only to be told, "Oh, I thought those old things were falling apart. I dropped them off at Goodwill last week." Lila had walked into the laundry room, closed the door, and sobbed quietly into a stack of towels. The memory of that moment gripped her now like a vice. She had spent years making herself smaller so they could feel bigger. She muted her favorite music, stopped inviting friends over for tea, adjusted her routines to avoid being in the way. She even stopped watching late-night shows because Camille once said she could hear the TV from the hallway. Every inch of herself that once lived freely in that home had been boxed up or silenced. And yet she still paid the mortgage. She still cooked dinner most nights. She still offered to babysit folded Nathan's laundry when he forgot it in the dryer, and left the porch light on if they were late coming home. For what? So they could push her into a garage with a twin bed and a lamp from the clearance rack. Lila took a shaky breath, blinking against the morning light. Her fingers clenched around the mug. She had to stop blaming herself. Yes, she'd allowed it. But they had chosen to take advantage of her kindness. They had seen her grief, her generosity, and twisted it into permission. And Nathan, her son, had let it happen. He'd watched Camille erase his father from that house, one photo at a time. He'd stood silent while his mother's voice was slowly smothered. Lila's throat tightened. Maybe she hadn't just lost her home. Maybe she'd lost him too. "Hey," Norma's voice broke through the silence. She walked onto the porch with her own mug and a thick folder in her hand. "You look like you've been arguing with ghosts," she said gently. Lila nodded, her voice low. "Just remembering." Norma sat beside her and handed over the folder. "What's this? My nephew Jerome's info. He's a lawyer, specializes in elder law and property disputes." Lila stared at the folder, hesitant. "I'm not elderly," Norma snorted. "You're 62 and sharp as a tack, but they crossed a line. And it's time you stopped paying for their dreams." Lila exhaled slowly. "You know what's funny," she said after a moment. "All those years I thought love was about sacrifice, about staying quiet so everyone else could be happy. But maybe love's not supposed to cost everything." Norma leaned in. "Exactly. You gave your whole heart, and they acted like it was a blank check." Lila's grip tightened on the folder. "Not anymore." There it was again, that feeling. Not anger exactly. Conviction. A deep-rooted strength that had been buried under grief and politeness and self-doubt. It was still there. Still hers. And if she had to fight for her place in the world, then so be it. No more erasing. No more apologizing for taking up space. The woman who once built a home with her bare hands and painted tulips along the mailbox, she wasn't gone. She was just getting started. The next morning, Lila stood in front of the mirror in Norma's guest room, smoothing the front of her blouse. It had been a long time since she'd worn something with structure, something not picked for comfort but for presence. It wasn't flashy, just a crisp navy button-up tucked into slacks, but it made her stand a little straighter. She stared at herself. Her eyes looked tired, yes, but there was something new there too, something she hadn't seen in a while. Steadiness. "Ready," Norma called from the hallway, keys jangling in her hand. "As I'll ever be," Lila replied, grabbing the folder with her bank records, mortgage statements, and a few handwritten notes. The drive to Jerome's office took just 15 minutes, but Lila's nerves made it feel longer. Norma, in her usual blunt fashion, tried to keep the mood light with off-color jokes and commentary about the state of city traffic, but Lila could barely focus. Her heart pounded with every passing mile. Jerome's office was in a converted Victorian home with a wooden sign out front that read Jerome West Attorney at Law, Elder Rights and Property Protection. The steps creaked as they climbed to the porch, and when the front door opened, a gust of cool, citrus-scented air greeted them. The receptionist, a kind woman named Tasha, offered water and ushered them into a spacious office lined with bookshelves and framed legal certificates. Jerome rose from behind his desk when they entered. Lila was caught off guard. He wasn't what she expected at all. Mid-30s, tall, dark curls, tucked neatly behind his ears, he looked more like a university lecturer than an attorney. His handshake was firm, but his smile was warm. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm glad you're here," he said. "Aunt Norma filled me in. Let's talk." Lila settled into the leather chair across from him, clutching her folder like a shield. She felt like she might forget how to speak, but Norma gave her a small nod, the same one she used to give back in high school right before Lila would walk into a test she hadn't studied for. "I'm not sure where to begin," Lila admitted. "Start with the truth," Jerome said gently. "Whatever that looks like." So she did. She told him about the house she and her husband Frank had built, about how after Frank passed, she'd signed the title over to her son Nathan and his wife Camille, thinking it was a way to secure their future. She explained how she continued making the mortgage payments, not just a few here and there, but every month automatically withdrawn from her account for nearly 2 years. She told him how her possessions were boxed up, her bedroom reassigned, and finally, how she returned from Vermont to find her suitcases on the sidewalk with a note directing her to the garage. Jerome listened quietly, making occasional notes, nodding, but never interrupting. When she finished, her throat felt dry and her palms were damp. "I know it was stupid," she muttered more to herself than anyone else. "I let them take advantage." "It wasn't stupid," Jerome said, his voice calm but firm. "It was generous and deeply human. You trusted your family." He opened a folder and laid out several documents, blank forms, highlighted legal definitions, and a notepad with scribbled statutes. "Here's where things stand legally," he said. "Even though the deed is no longer in your name, you've made consistent financial contributions to the property. That's not nothing. In fact, depending on the jurisdiction, we may be able to argue an equitable interest." Lila blinked. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means," Jerome continued, "that the court could recognize your right to reimbursement, or even partial ownership based on the principle of unjust enrichment. If someone benefits from your contributions without compensation or consent, that's a legal red flag." He leaned forward slightly, his tone turning deliberate. "Lila, you've been paying thousands of dollars into a home you no longer live in. You're not on the deed, and yet you're still financially responsible. That isn't just unfair, it could be actionable." Lila's breath caught. Norma let out a satisfied grunt. "Told you he knew his stuff." Jerome offered a faint smile. "This won't be quick, and it won't be easy. But you do have options. If nothing else, you can file a lien against the property, effectively halting any sale until the debt is resolved." Lila sat back, her head swimming with terms she hadn't heard in years. But what cut through all the noise was the one thing she hadn't had in so long: power. "I thought I was just stuck," she said quietly, like it was too late to do anything. "It's not too late," Jerome said, "and you're not powerless." That was the moment it shifted. Lila had spent so many years shrinking herself, believing that sacrifice was synonymous with love, that dignity could be bartered for peace. But here, in this office, with her name on those bank statements and her story laid bare, she saw it clearly. She had allowed herself to be erased. But she didn't have to stay that way. She reached into her folder and pulled out the most recent payment confirmation from the bank. "Tell me what I need to do," she said, "and how soon I can do it." Jerome nodded. "First, stop the automatic payments. That alone will force their hand. If they can't cover the mortgage themselves, they'll either have to sell or talk. Then we start preparing the claim for equitable relief. You'll need every record you can find: payment receipts, bank statements, text messages, anything that proves your involvement." "I have boxes of files," Lila said, "and a few emails Camille sent about mortgage dates." "Perfect. Let's gather all of it." Jerome jotted down a checklist and slid it across the desk. We'll draft a lien notice as a contingency. If they try to sell the house without compensating you, we file it immediately. Lila nodded. She felt the ground under her feet again, steady and real. Norma patted her arm. I've seen that look before, she said. That's the Lila who marched into a PTA meeting and got the whole school to swap vending machines for fresh fruit. Lila laughed softly. I was younger then. You were brave, Norma corrected. And you still are. Back at the house that evening, Lila stood by the dining room window, the sky awash in pinks and oranges. She watched as the last rays of sunlight dipped below the trees. In her hand, she held the checklist Jerome gave her. A plan. She wasn't going to plead with Nathan or Camille. She wasn't going to cry or explain or beg. She was going to confront them with documents, timelines, and legal precedent, with the full weight of the truth they'd tried so hard to bury. And maybe, just maybe, remind them who she was. Because Lila Bennett was no longer the woman in the garage. She was the woman they underestimated. And they were about to find out just how wrong they'd been. Lila stood on the porch of the house she had once called home, clutching the envelope in her hand like it might burn through her skin. The white paint on the trim was still the same shade she and Frank had picked out decades ago, antique pearl, but everything else felt foreign now. The flowers in the front yard had been replaced with minimalist gravel and geometric hedges. Camille's style, clean, cold, sterile. She rang the doorbell with a steady finger. It only took a few moments before Camille opened the door, her face tightening the second she saw Lila. Oh, she said, her tone flat. We weren't expecting you. Lila didn't flinch. I need to speak with both of you, Nathan too. Camille hesitated, scanning Lila's expression, then stepped aside. Fine. Come in. The air inside the house smelled like lavender detergent and scented candles. Too perfect, too staged. Lila's shoes echoed softly on the polished hardwood as she followed Camille into the living room, the room where she'd once read stories to Nathan on stormy nights, where Frank had danced with her in his socks, just because he felt like it. Now it was barely recognizable. Nathan walked in from the kitchen drying his hands with a dish towel. Mom. What's going on? Lila didn't sit. She remained standing in the center of the room like she was reclaiming ground. Her voice was calm and deliberate. I'm here to talk about the house. Nathan exchanged a glance with Camille, already on edge. What about it? Camille asked. Lila took a breath. I've stopped paying the mortgage. The silence that followed was deafening. Nathan blinked. Camille's jaw tightened. You, what he asked slowly. I've canceled the automatic payments, Lila repeated. As of this month, I will no longer be contributing any money to this house. Camille folded her arms. Are you serious? As serious as I was when I kept paying for nearly 2 years after I signed over the deed. Quietly. Out of love. Out of habit. But I'm done. Nathan sat down heavily on the edge of the couch. Mom, we rely on that money. Lila's voice sharpened. And I relied on my son to treat me with decency. Camille didn't miss a beat. If this is about the garage, it's not just about the garage. Lila snapped the first real bite in her voice. It's about being cast aside. It's about you treating me like some inconvenience to manage, while I paid the bills for a house I no longer had a voice in. Nathan looked stunned. Camille, however, stayed composed. Her eyes were calculating. So what now, she said. You just leave us in the lurch, risk foreclosure out of spite. This isn't about spite, Lila said, pulling the envelope from her purse. This is about what's fair. This is a notice of intent. I've met with an attorney. I have the bank statements, the proof of payment. If necessary, I'll file a lien on the property. Camille took the envelope and glanced at it, her lips curling in disdain. You're threatening us with legal action. I'm offering you a choice, Lila replied. If you want to keep the house, you'll need to assume full responsibility for it. I'm done paying for my own erasure. Nathan stood now, color rising in his cheeks. Mom, this is extreme. You're talking about suing your own family. No, Nathan. I'm talking about protecting myself from the family that's been using me. Camille stepped forward, her voice smooth, almost condescending. Lila, I know things haven't been perfect, but you have to understand we're doing our best. Nathan works long hours. I have Mia to care for and a freelance career that depends on having office space. The garage was a temporary compromise. Lila narrowed her eyes. Temporary. You put a bed in there, labeled my boxes. You didn't ask, you decided. Camille sighed, shaking her head with mock sadness. This isn't healthy. Maybe you should talk to someone. A therapist, perhaps. All this anger. There's nothing wrong with my mind, Lila said. Or my memory. I remember exactly how you smiled as you boxed up Frank's things. I remember Nathan standing by saying nothing while you tossed 35 years of my life into the garage like clutter. Nathan finally found his voice. You're overreacting. Lila's gaze hardened. Do you know what hurts the most? Not that you let it happen, Nathan, but that you didn't even notice it was wrong. There it was. A tremor in his face, a moment of guilt, maybe even shame, but it was fleeting. Camille reached for his hand like she was grounding him. You're being emotional, Camille said quietly. That word, emotional. It hit Lila like a slap. I am emotional, she said, because I raised a son who now sees me as disposable, because I sacrificed and loved and gave, and when I needed kindness in return, you handed me a key to a storage closet. Nathan looked down at the floor, his shoulders hunched. Camille's tone shifted. You're putting us in a really difficult position. If you stop paying, we may not qualify for the house in Oakwood Hills. Lila blinked. Excuse me. Nathan winced. We were planning to list the house next month. We have an offer pending. A beat passed. You were going to sell it, Lila asked, her voice low. Camille nodded, unfazed. We need a bigger place, closer to better schools. This house has equity now, thanks to your payments. It made sense. Lila's hands trembled. And when were you planning to tell me? Nathan rubbed the back of his neck. We were going to talk to you once the papers were signed. We didn't want to upset you. Lila let out a breathless laugh. You didn't want to upset me by selling the house I built. The house where I lived my entire adult life. The house I was still paying for. It's legally ours, Camille said flatly. But morally, Lila replied, it isn't. Nathan stepped forward, desperation creeping into his voice now. What do you want, Mom? We can't just undo everything. You signed the deed over. I want acknowledgement, Lila said. I want you to see what you've done. And I want you to understand that there are consequences. Camille's eyes narrowed. Are you seriously going to ruin our financial future over some misguided nostalgia? No, Lila said. I'm going to make sure you don't build your future on the back of my past. There was a long, tense silence. Nathan looked torn like a man caught between two worlds. Camille, on the other hand, had already calculated every outcome. She was banking on Lila backing down. But Lila didn't. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. You have 1 week. Either take over the mortgage or prepare for a legal challenge. The choice is yours. Camille's voice followed her down the hall. You'll regret this, Lila. Lila didn't stop walking. No, she said over her shoulder. I regret not doing it sooner. The front door clicked shut behind her. And for the first time in a long, long time, Lila Bennett walked away with her head held high. Lila's back ached by the end of her first shift at Harper's Diner. She hadn't stood on her feet for 8 hours straight in years, and her legs made sure she didn't forget it. But as she removed her apron and folded it neatly, a small smile tugged at her lips. Her hair smelled like bacon grease and coffee. Her shoes squeaked from a minor spill at table 6, and her tip jar jingled with a modest collection of 1s and 5s, but every dollar had been earned with her own 2 hands. That mattered. It mattered more than she'd expected. Harper's was a tiny place tucked between a laundromat and a hardware store off the county highway, the kind of spot with faded leather booths and chipped coffee cups that regulars claimed as their own. The sign out front had lost half a letter years ago. So it now read, Harp R's, which the locals lovingly joked about. Rosa, the owner, was a stocky woman with kind eyes, a gravelly voice, and zero patience for nonsense. You move fast, you smile big, and you listen better than anyone else in town, she'd said during Lila's interview. That's all the qualifications I need. By the end of her third day, Lila had memorized the menu, learned the quirks of the coffee machine, and earned the favor of old Mr. Tennyson, who tipped her $2 for remembering he liked his toast dark as Judgment Day. It was hard work, honest work, and oddly freeing. Each morning she pulled on her uniform, tied her apron, and stepped into a version of herself that had nothing to do with Nathan or Camille. She wasn't a mother. She wasn't a widow. She wasn't someone's burden. She was Lila, just Lila, and she was enough. In the evening, she'd return to Norma's, peel off her shoes at the door, and sink into the couch with a glass of tea while the news buzzed low in the background. Norma had turned her spare room into something of a haven: clean linens, a new lamp, even a little houseplant, she insisted, was good luck. You sure you want to keep working this hard? Norma would ask now and then. I mean, we could always binge crime dramas and yell at the TV instead. I need this, Lila always replied. I need to rebuild. From the ground up. And that's exactly what she did. But even as she found footing in her new life, trouble brewed at her old address. Nathan and Camille had underestimated the consequences of Lila's financial withdrawal. Badly. First came the missed mortgage payment. Then, a sharply worded letter from the bank. Next, a call from their real estate agent who informed them that until the lien notice was resolved, they couldn't move forward with the sale of the house. The Oakwood Hills dream home, open floor plan, school district, accolades, stainless steel. Everything slipped further out of reach with each passing day. Camille grew frantic. Nathan grew silent. And Lila, she waited. It was nearly 2 weeks after their last confrontation when the text came. Nathan, Mom, can we talk, please? It's important. She stared at the screen for a full minute before responding. Lila Harper's Diner, after 5. Not before. That evening, as the dinner rush began to slow and the sun dipped behind the diner's parking lot, Lila spotted him through the window. Nathan stood outside, hands in his pockets, scanning the booths like a man bracing for a storm. Rosa caught Lila's eye. Friend of yours, family, she said with a sigh. Rosa nodded toward the back. Take 15. Lila met Nathan at a quiet corner booth near the jukebox. He looked different. Drawn, paler than usual, like he hadn't slept well in days. He wore one of his tailored shirts, but it was wrinkled, like he'd pulled it from the hamper. You look good, Mom, he said almost timidly. I feel good, she replied. What's going on? He leaned forward, voice low. We're in trouble. Lila said nothing, just waited. The mortgage is overdue. The bank called about the lien. They're flagging our credit. Camille and we didn't think it would get this far. You thought I'd back down, she said plainly. He didn't argue. She's furious, he admitted. Not just about the lien, about everything. The house in Oakwood Hills is off the table now. We can't qualify, and if this keeps up, we'll have to sell under value or risk foreclosure. Lila stirred the last of her coffee, watching the cream swirl. That sounds like a mess. Please, Nathan said, more desperate now. We just need time. If you resume the payments for a few more months, we can fix this. Then we'll sell and you'll get paid back. She looked up. Paid back, Nathan? I don't want reimbursement. I want respect. I want you to see what you did. We didn't mean to hurt you, he said, but his eyes darted away the way they always did when he wasn't telling the full truth. You didn't mean to throw me in the garage, she asked, her voice tight. Didn't mean to erase your father's memory or box up my life like seasonal decorations. I thought we were doing what was best for everyone. You mean best for Camille? He flinched. I'm not the villain here, Nathan said, voice rising slightly. I didn't ask you to keep paying. That was your choice. Yes, Lila said, her tone sharp. My choice to believe in you. My choice to support you when your marriage was crumbling, your job uncertain. My choice to be your safety net again and again. Nathan rubbed his temples. We have a daughter, Mom. Mia needs stability. A home. You had one, Lila replied coldly. But you were too busy chasing upgrades to see the value in what you already had. He sighed heavily. So that's it. You won't help us. I've already helped you more than I ever should have, she said. And now I'm helping myself. He leaned back, eyes hardening slightly. If you go through with the lien, we'll lose everything. Lila stood, picking up her apron. No, Nathan, you already did. She turned away, her feet aching, her heart pounding, but not from guilt. From resolve. Because she wasn't just a bystander anymore. She wasn't a ghost drifting through someone else's story. She was Lila Bennett. And she had finally put down new roots. The wind was sharp that afternoon as Lila stepped into Jerome's office, the stack of documents tucked under her arm. Her coat flared slightly as she walked, her boots tapping with calm determination. She had come prepared, not just with paperwork, but with a plan. Jerome met her in the lobby with a knowing nod. You sure about this? He asked, guiding her into the conference room. I've never been more sure of anything, Lila replied. She settled into the leather chair, her hands steady despite the adrenaline humming beneath her skin. Minutes later, Nathan and Camille arrived. Camille led the way, dressed in a sleek blazer and heels too sharp for the cracked sidewalk outside. Her expression was polite but cool, like she was here, out of obligation, not necessity. Nathan trailed behind, his eyes flicking toward Lila, then quickly away. He looked tired, more so than he had at the diner. Jerome greeted them briefly before gesturing toward the chairs across from Lila. Thank you both for coming. Let's get started. Camille crossed her legs, folding her hands over her knee. We're hoping to resolve this quickly. The lien is preventing us from selling the house, and we've already made an offer on a new property. Jerome raised an eyebrow. Yes, and until the matter of financial restitution is addressed, that offer and your sale are both at risk. Nathan looked pained. Can't we just come to some kind of payment arrangement? Lila leaned forward, placing a manila folder on the table and sliding it toward them. That's what this is. Camille opened it and began reading. As her eyes scanned the document, her jaw clenched. You've got to be kidding. Nathan leaned over to read beside her. Within seconds, his eyebrows shot up. You want to buy the house? Lila nodded. At the current mortgage balance, no profit, no gain, just what's left on the loan. You'll be free to move, the lien will be lifted, and I get my home back, Camille scoffed, shutting the folder with a snap. That's not a counteroffer. That's extortion. Jerome's voice was calm but firm. It's actually a very generous solution. You receive full debt relief and avoid a protracted legal battle. Mrs. Bennett isn't seeking damages or interest, just her home. This house is worth triple the mortgage, Camille said sharply. You're asking us to hand over a six-figure asset for pennies. No, Lila said. I'm asking you to return something that never should have been taken. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. Mom, be reasonable. I have been reasonable for years, Lila replied. I was reasonable when you moved me out of my bedroom, when you painted over Frank's study, when you boxed up 35 years of my life without asking. Camille leaned in, voice icy. You gave us that house, legally, willingly, and then kept paying the bills while you redecorated and restructured me out of it, Lila shot back. That makes it more than a gift. That makes it an investment. And now I'm calling it in. Nathan looked at Jerome. If we don't agree to this, what happens? We proceed with formal litigation, Jerome said. The lien remains your credit, continues to deteriorate, and the house becomes increasingly harder to sell. Court could enforce a judgment that includes repayment for all mortgage contributions, legal fees, and interest. In short, it gets messier, more expensive, and much slower. Camille's lips pressed into a thin line. This is absurd. She's manipulating the system. Lila folded her hands neatly. I'm using the system. You manipulated me. Nathan dropped his head into his hands. Camille, maybe we should think about this. We are not selling to her, Camille hissed. We can find another buyer once the lien is lifted. Offer her a lump sum. 10,020 even. Jerome interjected. She's not interested in cash. No, Lila said. Because this isn't about money. It's about reclaiming what matters. My life, my space, my memories. Camille stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. We'll get our own lawyer. You're welcome to, Jerome replied. But be advised, every day this drags out the market shifts. And with your credit under pressure, financing your next move becomes more difficult. Nathan stared at the folder in front of him like it might bite. Camille began pacing. We already told Mia about the new house. We're under contract. This, she jabbed a finger at the document. This ruins everything. Lila watched her without emotion. Then maybe you should have thought of that before treating your benefactor like clutter. Nathan looked up slowly. You planned this. From the moment you stopped paying. No, Lila said. I hoped it wouldn't come to this. I hoped you'd realize how wrong it was to treat me like an obstacle. But when you didn't, I decided to stop hoping and start acting. Camille sat down again, deflated. You're seriously going to take this house? Lila's voice softened, but didn't waver. I'm taking my life back. If the house comes with it, that's justice. The silence that followed was heavy. Finally, Nathan cleared his throat. If we agree, you'll resume the mortgage immediately. Yes, Lila said. And I'll release the lien upon transfer of title. Camille's glare could have melted glass. You're breaking this family. No, Lila said. You broke it the day you decided I was expendable. Jerome reached into his briefcase and handed them a copy of the transfer agreement. You don't have to sign now, but if you want to salvage your credit, avoid litigation, and move forward with your purchase, this is your best option. Nathan said nothing. Camille looked like she wanted to throw the folder across the room, but they didn't. They took it. Lila stood. Take all the time you want, she said, voice clear. You've got 72 hours. As she turned to leave, Nathan called after her. You know this changes everything. She paused at the door. I'm counting on it. Outside, the wind had picked up, tugging at her coat as she stepped into the early evening chill. For the first time in a long while, Lila didn't feel like she was running away from anything. She was walking toward something, toward home. The documents were signed at 9:17 a.m. on a drizzly Tuesday. No hugs, no thank yous, not even a handshake. Just the scratch of pens against paper and the sterile rustle of folders being passed across a polished oak desk. Camille didn't look up once. Nathan's hand trembled slightly as he initialed the final page. When it was done, he pushed the pen away as if it had scalded him. Lila watched the exchange with steady eyes. She said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Jerome flipped through the paperwork, his thumb brisk and efficient as he checked for completeness. Congratulations, Mrs. Bennett, he said at last. You are once again the legal owner of 148 Rosewood Lane. Camille gathered her bag in silence. Nathan stood stiffly, his face pale. I hope you're happy, he muttered. Lila didn't flinch. No, but I'm at peace. They left without another word. Jerome turned to her. You sure you're okay? I'm better than okay, she said softly. I'm back. That afternoon, Lila returned to the house not as a guest, not as a shadow, not as a burden, but as its owner. The key in her hand felt heavier than she remembered. It turned smoothly in the lock, and as the door creaked open, a rush of air, stale and faintly perfumed with Camille's essential oils, greeted her like a sigh. She stepped inside and closed the door gently behind her. The house was quiet. Not the oppressive silence she'd come to dread in recent years, but a kind of stillness she welcomed. Like it was waiting, she wandered from room to room, her fingers trailing along surfaces that had once felt like home. The kitchen gleamed with its modern appliances, soulless steel, that had replaced the warmth of her old yellow stove. The marble countertops Camille insisted on were cold under her fingertips, but the window above the sink still offered a perfect view of the garden Frank had planted. In the hallway, she paused to examine the walls. The family photos were gone, but faint outlines of their frames lingered on the paint ghosts of memories scrubbed too quickly. She opened the small hall closet and smiled at what remained a pair of her gardening gloves, a rusted trowel, and Frank's old Cubs cap. Upstairs, she stood in what used to be her bedroom. The mattress was gone, the walls painted a trendy shade of gray, but the floor creaked the same way it always had, and the light through the window fell in a familiar golden streak across the floorboards. She stepped inside and closed the door, leaning against it with her eyes closed. "This is mine," she whispered. This was always mine. She spent the rest of the day cleaning, not because the house was dirty, but because it was no longer Camille's. Each swipe of the rag, each item boxed and removed, was a reclamation. The sterile vases and cold-toned artwork were the first to go. She stacked them by the garage with a note that said pick up by Friday, knowing full well Camille wouldn't return. She found her own boxes in the back corner of the garage, labeled in Camille's familiar handwriting, Lila's stuff. She carried them back inside one by one. That night, after hours of unpacking and rearranging, Lila sat in the living room with a mug of tea and her feet tucked beneath her. The reading lamp she loved had been in storage. She'd plugged it in and turned it on without hesitation. Its soft glow lit the room in a way no ceiling light ever could. On the coffee table sat a photo of her and Frank, dancing barefoot in the backyard. It had been tucked behind her old recipe books, a little bent, but otherwise unharmed. She'd cleaned the frame and set it down right in the center of the mantel. Outside, the rain had stopped. The windows fogged gently from the warmth of the radiator humming behind her. She reached down and pulled an old quilt over her lap, the same one Frank used to wrap around her shoulders when she got cold during movies. She looked around and felt a ripple of something unfamiliar. Not grief, not loss, though both lingered, but purpose. Ownership, identity. For so long, she had defined herself by who she was to others: Frank's wife, Nathan's mother, Camille's unwanted housemate. But here, in the gentle silence of her own home, she was just Lila. And that was more than enough. Her phone buzzed once. A text from Norma. "You home yet?" "Yes, finally." "Wine or ice cream?" "Surprise me. Bring both." She smiled. A small, private smile that stretched deeper than her lips. It was the kind of smile that didn't need anyone's approval to exist. 20 minutes later, Norma arrived with a bottle of red and a pint of mint chip. She let herself in with a laugh and a hug. "Well, well, look at this queen in her castle," she declared, spinning slowly in the entryway. "I almost forgot how cozy this place used to be." "It still is," Lila said, underneath all the granite and drama. They sat in the kitchen with mismatched mugs of wine, eating ice cream straight from the tub, their laughter bouncing off the walls that once carried tension, like insulation. "You did it," Norma said, clinking her spoon against Lila's glass. "I did," Lila whispered. "And I didn't even cry. You'll cry later. But it'll be the good kind." They talked into the night about everything and nothing, about the diner, about Jerome, about the time Norma once got kicked out of a library for yelling at a chess coach who flirted with Lila in 1983. And when the clock crept toward midnight, Norma kissed her cheek and left with a wink. "Sleep well, warrior." Lila locked the door behind her and walked slowly through the house one last time. She touched the doorframe where Nathan's height was etched in pencil marks, some faded, some still clear. She paused by the front window and stared at the garden beds, now waiting for spring. She opened the linen closet and inhaled the soft scent of lavender, the real kind, not Camille's synthetic blend. In the bedroom, she turned down the quilt and climbed in. The sheets were fresh. The night air was cool. For the first time in years, She slept with the window cracked open like she used to back when life was simpler and she felt safe in her own space. She dreamed of tulips blooming, of Frank whistling as he painted the fence, of the front door swinging open to laughter, not orders. And when she woke with the sunrise spilling across her comforter, Lila Bennett smiled without hesitation. She was home, not just in bricks and floorboards, in herself. The scent of lemon oil and fresh paint drifted through the house as Lila stepped back to admire the new color in the front hallway. A soft golden hue, not flashy, just warm. Inviting. It reminded her of the sun that used to filter through the front windows when Frank came home from his morning walks, whistling as he shook off his coat. She'd spent the last few months carefully, lovingly restoring the house. Not remodeling, not modernizing, but reclaiming. One room at a time. She replaced Camille's icy grays with vibrant pastels and warm neutrals. The kitchen was once again hers, right down to the mismatched mugs and the tiny floral curtain she sewed herself over the sink. In the den, Frank's fishing rods hung proudly above the fireplace, mounted like the trophies they'd always been to her. In the hallway, the old photo frames returned pictures of birthday parties, graduations, beach trips, and the goofy, spontaneous moments that marked a life well lived. She wasn't trying to turn back time. She was just picking up where her story had been paused. And every brushstroke, every rearranged shelf felt like a declaration, I still matter. At Harper's Diner, she worked 4 shifts a week now. Rosa had offered to bump her to full-time, but Lila declined. She liked the rhythm she'd found mornings at the diner, afternoons at home, evenings on the porch with a glass of sweet tea and her thoughts. The tips were enough, the routine grounding. Some of the regulars had started bringing her little gifts, homemade jam, old books, hand-knitted mittens. She kept them all in a basket near the front door, a testament to how even small kindnesses could anchor a person. Norma came by often, as did Jerome. They helped with little projects, brought over groceries when the weather turned, or simply showed up with takeout and gossip. Rosa had dropped off a pie one Sunday afternoon just because, and Lila had caught herself grinning for no reason long after the door closed. It wasn't the family she'd expected, but it was the one she had chosen, and that made all the difference. The knock came one chilly April afternoon. Lila had been in the living room straightening a row of framed photos on the mantel. She opened the door and found Nathan standing on the porch, his hands buried in the pockets of a jacket that looked too thin for the cold. He looked older, not just tired, worn down, defeated in a way that came not from one failure, but from many small ones piling up until they crushed something inside. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. Lila's hand remained on the doorframe. "Nathan." He hesitated. "Can we talk?" She opened the door wider and gestured to the porch swing. Outside. He followed, glancing around the porch as he sat. His eyes landed on the potted tulips she'd planted weeks earlier, their buds just beginning to open. "Camille's pregnant," he said. Lila blinked. Again, he nodded. "Due in October. We weren't exactly planning it." She waited. There was always more with Nathan now. "We lost the place in Oakwood Hills," he continued. "The buyers backed out after the lien delay, and we couldn't cover both mortgages anyway. Camille's been picking up temp work. I've been juggling side gigs. It's been hard." Lila folded her arms. "Actions have consequences." He winced but nodded. "I know. That's why I'm here." Her eyes narrowed. "You need money." "No," he said quickly. "No, we're getting by." "Barely, but we are. Mia keeps asking why she doesn't see you anymore." Lila's chest tightened. "She misses you. She doesn't understand what happened." "I do," Lila said. "I understand exactly what happened." Nathan looked down. "Camille thinks we should try to move forward. For the kids' sake." "Does Camille think I should forget too?" she asked quietly. "Forget the garage. The way you stood by while she erased me from my own life." He didn't answer. "I'm not angry anymore," Lila said. "But I'm not pretending either." You don't get to use my granddaughter as a bargaining chip. I wasn't, he began, then stopped. We'd just like her to see you again. Maybe you could come visit sometime. She studied him. Not just his face, but his posture, his voice, the pieces of the man he had become. She saw glimmers of the boy she'd once tucked into bed, but they were faint now. Life and choices had carved a different man out of that child. I'll see Mia, she said at last. But here, on my terms. He nodded slowly, a trace of something like relief in his eyes. And I want it in writing, she added, that this home is off limits. No title games, no future claims. Nathan exhaled, understood. They sat in silence for a while, the wind rustling the porch screen. Eventually, Lila stood. I'm not the same woman you put in that garage, she said. You may never understand what you took from me, but I hope one day you realize what it cost you. He nodded again, and she opened the door for him. I'll tell Mia you said hi, he murmured as he left. Lila didn't respond. She watched him walk down the path, shoulders hunched, then disappeared down the sidewalk. That night, her porch was filled. Norma arrived first, balancing a tray of lasagna and a bottle of red wine. Jerome brought his new girlfriend, a schoolteacher named Marie, with a laugh that could brighten cloudy skies. Rosa followed with a peach cobbler and a bag of diner coffee for emergencies. They sat around the porch table under strands of fairy lights Lila had strung the week before. The tulips nodded in the breeze. Music played softly from a speaker tucked near the swing, and laughter rose with the stars. Lila leaned back in her chair, her wine glass warm in her hand, and looked around at the faces glowing with joy and kindness. Her chosen family. They didn't need to understand everything she had been through. They just needed to be here now. To Lila, Norma declared, raising her glass. Who reminds us that life doesn't end at 62? It just gets gutsier. The others raised theirs with a cheer. Later, as the night deepened and the porch emptied, Lila remained on the swing, the quiet settling around her like a soft shawl. She looked out at the garden, the lights twinkling softly in the beds, and smiled. She was no longer invisible. She was Lila Bennett, and every inch of it was finally hers.